Welcome everybody to our event on the future of environmental health. The topic of today really is how do we maintain the relevance of the Chartered Institute and of the environmental health profession in a very, very rapidly changing world. So I'd like to introduce our distinguished panel. Lisa Ackerley, who'll be familiar to many of you from TV, I guess. Lisa, to my knowledge, she's the only EHO who has a Wikipedia entry. She's been an EHP for 32 years. She's an expert in commercial food safety. 2 series specifically she appeared in were Rogue Restaurants, and she's appeared on the BBC Watchdog programme, and more recently in Rip Off Britain. To her right, Dawn Wellham has been a member for a mere 30 years. She's a Chartered Fellow. She was Technical Director of Asda Walmart and had a stint in the US, I believe, for Walmart. She is currently Technical Director of Sci Global, dividing her time between UK and Australia. Tim, Hampshire. Tim has been a member for a mere 42 years, so he's a new kid on the block. He's a Chartered Fellow, began his local government career in 1972, and he was a Service Director. He worked in many authorities, but he was a Service Director in Sutton and in his hometown town of Worthing. He moved to the CIEH in 2009 as Head of Professional Services. Tim is a legal expert. He works for the Citizens Advice Bureau and the Samaritans in his spare time, and he is the CIEH's official recession tracker. Alan, to his right, Chartered member of 30 years standing.
29 to be precise.
29 years, apologies.
I feel like a fraud of being here, really.
He's worked in local government since 1987. He's currently Head of Regulatory Services for Cornwall Council, which has been a unitary council, as you know, since 2009. Has introduced a commercial operating model into the council, which we'll be very keen to hear about later. Peter, to his right, is a student member of the CIEH, completed his BSc at Northumbria University in 2015. He's been very active in the CIEH's voluntary network, serving as the student representative on the CIEH's General Assembly. It says here he's currently looking into scalable digital solutions to regulatory problems in the northeast of England. As I said, we're kind of crystal ball gazing. Nothing is kind of off limits, so we're kind of thinking the unthinkable. And the first theme of the discussion is who will regulate what? So, we've seen the public sector shrinking, particularly since the recession, some really, really large cuts to services, up to 40%. We've seen the growth of the primary authority system, co-regulation, earned recognition it's called now, isn't it? Recently, the new Food Standards Agency blueprint for food enforcement, which is quite a radical document, charging for services. I guess I'd like to ask maybe either Lisa or Dawn if they feel, perhaps Lisa particularly, in that context, do you think there will be anything that, will there come a point where there won't be any HOs anymore because everything will be co-regulation or self-regulation?
Well, I think we don't need a crystal ball to know that things are going to change radically, but I feel very strongly that there's always going to be a place for environmental health practitioners. And in particular, as things become more open to earned recognition and businesses paying for services, then I think you need somebody to be the gatekeeper and the enforcer still. So however much we're going to allow earned recognition to take place and for other auditors to carry out the sort of inspections, and whatever model however that takes place, I think the need is for an environmental health practitioner to be at the hub of where that information comes into, whether it's at the local authority, which I hope it will stay at, or whether it's at a more central unit. Now, I think the strength of environmental health is in our breadth of our education and the fact that we are multifaceted and we don't just look at food, we look at food in the context of the environment. So whilst I've spent most of my time looking at food safety, there's always been that in the context of what else is going on. It's the pest control, it's housing. There might be so many other things that are important. And I'll just draw just one anecdote, really. I was recently talking to some solicitor about a case where the microbiologists from Public Health England were absolutely adamant that the presence of, there was a food poisoning outbreak, the salmonella, they found the type of salmonella that was the same as the one in the food poisoning outbreak on a wash basin. And they also found it on a drain, inside the drains, way under the business. And they'd drawn the conclusion that the salmonella had actually come up from the drain into the wash basin, and that's how it had caused the infection. And that just showed to me how important it is that we actually understand the basics, like drains and water traps and all that sort of stuff. And if we take that away, then people will not have the right understanding to investigate properly. And we've got to make a fuss about it. We've got to make a fuss about how good we are. And that breadth of education is our absolute strength. We need to play to it.
Maybe a bit more radical. The answer could be nothing. We may be actually regulating nothing in 30 years' time, probably if we continue on our current path, which is we could wither away to irrelevance, couldn't we? We are at a point where many local authorities certainly are probably in crisis in their funding. Do we have a strong enough voice nationally? Do people really get and appreciate what we do? Are we just kicked around as pawns by the big regulators, the FSA, the HSE, Public Health England, and are we appreciated for what we do? So if we're not, then I think we probably will face extinction unless we do something a bit different. So I think we've got the opportunity at the moment to do something a bit different. So I think there's a challenge for us there that we might need to get back to some basics about what environmental health is, what the CIEH represents, what's its purpose. So before we even talk about who's going to be regulating, is the only purpose of environmental health to be regulators? Do we need to look at what we're trying to achieve via regulation instead of what we regulate? So what we're trying to achieve, is it good standards? And if so, there may be a whole raft of different ways to achieve those standards rather than just by enforcing or regulating. So maybe we need to go back to some of the basics of what's our purpose and what's our priorities based on intelligence, and therefore what are the intervention strategies, and are we best placed to be able to actually carry out some of those intervention strategies, or do we need to work with others?
What do you think, Tim?
Well, I mean, regulation is a tool. It's not an end in itself, but I've been around long enough to know that both regulations and regulators come and go. I can remember a time before Health and Safety Executive, the Food Standards Agency, and also the Environment Agency, and the world will move on, no doubt, and those will not exist at some point in the future. Local authorities have got a long and honourable track record, and I'm a strong supporter for trying to persuade people in local government that regulation is still part of their sort of leitmotif, that it really is a key tool to influence their local environment. But it is right that it is a means to an end, not an end in itself. So ultimately it's about how do we deal with the things that kill and hurt the people in our areas. I hope we can persuade people that local authorities still have a role, but we have to be able to demonstrate that we do.
Okay. So, Dawn, you've experienced environmental health from the other side of the fence, really, haven't you?
Well, I would say that I've experienced it from all sides of the fence. All sides of the fence. Okay, so in terms of the three parts of the triangle, as an enforcer, if you like, an environmental health officer with Wakefield, then on the regulated side with ASDA, and then more recently in terms of a consultant kind of capacity for both for SAI but obviously individual businesses. But I would say that I personally would be really devastated to think that environmental health as a profession wasn't going to be around in only a few years. And I don't go as far as 30 years because I think any robust business plan that we're going to come up with, it needs to be kind of 3 to 5 years focused if we're going to be really sensible about it, because we have got no idea what the next 30 years brings us. But 3 to 5 years seems a sensible target. I would say that it's what we do. I echo, a lot of what you've said. In fact, everything you've said in terms of being a multidisciplinary and kind of, understanding lots of things and how they all fit together as a bigger piece of the jigsaw is a real advantage. And I'd hate to see that lost. I'd hate to see it also moving to a centralised organisation, such as the FSA, because I do think there's got to be that local authority touch. It is about community, it is about society. I think an awful lot of wrongs and kind of the misfortunes that we now kind of are ruining over have become of social kind of networks and broke, that to break down. So I think the local authority element is crucial to this. But rather than, who will regulate what, I think it's how will we regulate that is actually more important. Somebody mentioned, and I've forgotten who it was, all of the things that that we are great or we're well known for. I would take exception to that because I don't think we are known for great things. You look at, what we have been challenged with in terms of any of our metrics, and they're all input focused. It's how many audits can you do? And I must sound like a broken record because, for the past 10 to 15 years, I've been saying it has to be output metric. If it's that we are wanting to improve public health, well, why have we not got a challenge of a 10% reduction in communicable diseases, for example? But no, it's all input based. I think as a profession, we have to embrace change. And some of us, more than others, are reluctant to do that. And, I don't actually accept change particularly well. But I do, accept that we have to change. So I think, will we audit anything? I don't even think we'll be auditing in 5 years' time. Whether it's CCTV and anybody can actually just log in and have a look and see what, is going on behind that deli counter, for instance. I think audits are just not even going to feature, quite honestly. Okay. I think they're ineffective. I think they're inefficient. I think they're a distraction. We have to find ways to regulate in a very different way. I think we have to work far better as a profession. So these divisions between private sector environmental health officers or public sector environmental health officers, at the end of the day, we all joined, I would guess, for the same reason. And Peter mentioned this about, creating good or making a difference. Well, other than the pension and kind of, holidays and all the rest of it and flexi time, I would say that most of us came in to actually, do our little bit and help, because it is a vocational sort of industry or network. Because I was saying to everybody else, and we had lots of nodding heads in the green room beforehand, about we joined a profession that we have to say the same things to the same people pretty much every single day, and at night dust ourselves down from the battles that we've actually had to go back into battle the following day to really try and make a difference. And that takes a heck of a lot of grit and determination. And I have got so much respect for a lot of the profession. I just think we need to be working together and really understanding how we can better prepare for the future. The only thing that we're certain of, it will not look as it does today. But I don't, forget audits, just gone.
Okay, so it's kind of real-time monitoring of behaviour and...
Yeah.
And that's really good. I'm sure you'll have lots to say about this segment, but that kind of leads us into the next theme, which is technology, because clearly... the smartphone, the tablet. We know that they can monitor temperatures. They can record sound. They can potentially identify bacteria on foodstuffs. Quite apart from all of the trivial business of talking to each other and communicating on social media. So it does seem that they will play an increasing role in let's call it regulation for convenience, but
well, I think it's
the monitoring of health and safety and food safety and.
It's not just going to be, it's not what the regulators will be using, it's what the people will be using to send the data up for the regulators to observe and for things, for example, like assessment of non-conformances could quite easily be done without a re-inspection. So one of the things we feel quite passionately about is that with the food hygiene rating scheme, we need people to be able to get in them and change the rating very much quicker.
So it's like a spy in the kitchen kind of thing.
Well, why can't people send photographs, evidence in different ways? It doesn't have to be a re-inspection. And I think moving on from that, it may end up being we don't need an inspection at all, because if all the data is actually transparent and people can see what's going on, the temperatures of the fridges, the inspections, everything else, and that goes to a central point, which is the regulator, then maybe they spend more time thinking holistically rather than going off and doing a food safety inspection.
I could see Alan nodding, but how would you charge for that, though?
You charge that. You said about the smartphones. One thing for me around technologies is really interesting is that over the last 30 years, I think the rate of change of technology is staggering, isn't it? And I think what's going to happen in the next 30 years is going to blow most people's minds, isn't it? We all going to end up as part part machine, part computer. We're going to have chips in the back of our heads that we're all going to be...
Speak for yourself.
Our brain's going to be already tapped into the internet. We just blink and things will happen and we're connected to everybody.
Yeah.
But if we look back at what we've achieved in environmental health over the last 30 years, I can remember probably about 27 years ago, just about remember about 27 years ago, when I think there was a handheld instrument that people could tap in the results of a food hygiene inspection. It was revolutionary. 27 years ago. How many authorities at the moment are even using tablets to enter data from a food hygiene inspection straight into their back office database, clunky old database? Some, but not many. That's only 27 years. So what the bloody hell have we been doing for 27 years? Watching technology move on. So again, I think that's an area where if we're not careful, the technology will overtake us. Social media and how that works and how public want to be involved, engaged, do more, don't like being nannied. I think we need to get a grip.
It's a good point.
I'll give you a good example of something that I'm working on at the moment. I mentioned about starting my PhD with Queen's, and I'm fascinated by the technology.
Which is in fraud, isn't it? It's in food fraud.
Yeah, food fraud with the lovely
Chris
Chris Elliott. Yeah.
She's saying it's a pin-up.
One of the other things that I do at the moment is I do quite a lot of work in mapping out the tuna supply chain in Indonesia, just because I can.
Well, as you do.
As you do. And, well, it's near to Australia, so that helps.
Okay.
And it just was a chance conversation, and the fingerprint technology that I don't know if anybody is aware of what Chris is working on. Anybody aware? There's a great article, and if anybody does want it, if you ask, I can send the link around to an article that he did for the Financial Times on this that it will explain it far better than I can explain it. I call it the wobble technology, but this is a handheld device that actually you can put on, say if you've got some cumin or something like that, actually in the factory, and assuming that you've got the reference library created back in Queen's, this handheld device, it's not a mobile phone, but it can actually be incorporated into one. You're really going to show my ignorance on the technology, but we'll give it a go. Basically, it fires electrons and it makes everything in that wobble, okay? And it measures how much it wobbles, in which direction, and all the rest of it. And you can get this three-dimensional diagram, sort of, or model structure on the computer, on a computer. And from that, it can tell you whether that really is cumin. Now, it can tell you if it is cumin or whether it isn't cumin. Wow. What I like about that is it's real time. You're not waiting. It actually makes positive release possible, which is something that has not been possible to date. The only other piece of kit that is
What's
used at the moment...
positive release? What do you mean by that?
Positive release. So in other words, rather than do a recall or withdrawal if something has gone wrong, you're actually finding out before it goes into the supply chain and before it's affected somebody. But, you know, if you think of examples like that where, you know, that's environmental health professionals are actually pursuing that. And that is really about making a difference.
Yeah. In terms of the technology that sort of supersedes that, though, as a profession, I actually think that we are incredibly behind the times. In terms of technology, absolutely and unequivocally on a national and international basis due to the distinct lack of sharing of knowledge between local authorities, countries, and on a global scale. We are a global profession that, to an extent at the moment, in this very room, with an exclusive membership base. And we don't share the information in between different areas, different sections, different fields that can complement our abilities and our work. I recently have been doing research into smart cities and open data, if anyone's familiar with sort of the ideas in themselves. And in Newcastle, for example, they've taken, you were saying about social media before, they've taken how people put a photo up on Twitter of a flood, of a giant puddle. In fact, if any of you watched Drummond Puddle Watch when it was on, yep, to work out where they're actually missing out holes in their flood defences. Okay. So it's actually taking geospatial data and then actually applying it to flood defences. Okay. In addition, you've also got things like actual smart cities, the community engagement approach to public health through engaged citizens. And if any of you are interested in following this up, have a look at the WAG Society, that's WAAG, in Amsterdam. And also, Leeds City Council have been doing, they did a report recently, it was cities as places of well-being, which has a look at how smart and open data can actually complement public health approaches. Okay. As a profession, I don't think that we're looking into that as much as we should be outside of perhaps academic institutes, which are the ones focusing on it.
And I think it's part of a general issue about we don't tend to capture information, write down, report on, record sort of good work that our members have done. I mean, we've all been guilty of this, and I know it's one of the things I bang on about. And it, you know, whether we share it electronically or in paper form, I think there's an issue there. But obviously, one of the things that new technology does is enable us to store and retrieve information and to share it much, you know, to a much greater extent than we could before.
You can see the possibilities here, though, couldn't you? With what you said about intelligence, we're going away from old databases, clunky old databases, which we have to keep putting stuff in 3 times before it goes in. It's really difficult to retrieve, to cloud-based information and open source information.
Absolutely.
One thing that environmental health has not been good at over the last 30 years is how we collect our intelligence and use it. Are we really using intelligence properly and sharing it and using it to drive the priorities and therefore the intervention strategies? So if we start joining that up, really getting ahead of the game and trying to, well, catching up with the game probably, joining some of that up, the possibilities then become a bit endless, don't they? If we use that intelligence, and then you can harness that, you can see how things could be, couldn't you?
I can't imagine, though, local authorities ever using predictive analytics the way that it should be used. I only say that because, you know, you make the point, 30 years ago, handheld units and how many local authorities are using it. You know, companies that I work for and that you're involved with are using predictive analytics. And the amount of information that is already available is huge. You know, you're able now to overlay a supply chain map from a food point of view and a traceability point of view. You can now overlay that with criminal organisation and various other feeds that, you know, well, lots of other feeds that can give you, you know, information that then when you do your predictive analytics, you can identify where, you know, the weak links are in that particular chain. You know, you can actually find out from association, literally on a programme, it'll jump up at you and say, yes, but that person's third brother, second cousin, whatever it is, you know, was a disqualified director because they did food fraud or something.
I don't think anyone's ever had this kind of discussion before, so I think it's really useful. And I think if people don't know about it, it's because people like me, journalists, need to translate the world that you and Lisa work in to the world of local authorities, or help to do that.
I think one of the big problems has been that some local authorities maybe started off using new technology and it cost a huge amount of money, like you were just saying. And then people get sort of, they're sucked in there. They don't actually lose all that expense that's gone into the hardware that's gone really ancient and really should be just ditched. And it's making that huge leap of faith from sort of having clunky old hardware, clunky old databases to the cloud-based systems. And that's really where they've got to just ditch all the old stuff and become more modern. And it's really hard for people to actually make that transition.
A lot of what we've already been using points to whether people are well informed or not. It doesn't actually give you a great deal of information as to their degree of intent. And actually, I mean, I work on the 4 quadrants, as in the well-informed, the well-intended. The well-informed but the ill-intended just help them get to be well-informed. And anybody that's on the left side, that ill-intent, get rid, delist, do whatever, send them to Robocop. But, it takes a very different way of looking at things to actually identify the drivers and the indicators for intent. It can be done, but that's what we need to focus on, I reckon.
The last section is about kind of, and I think it's sort of very relevant to technology as well. It's about how lifestyle and how that affects health, and how the threats to our health and well-being are not. They are possibly still contaminated food, and there's certainly pollution and nitrous oxide and so forth. But they're maybe not the traditional things that environmental health officers dealt with, which was microbiology, germs and food poisoning and viruses. So the fact that we do have a problem of obesity, certainly, which leading to obesity and cardiovascular disease, sedentary lifestyles, prevalence of smoking, which is reducing, lifestyle-related health. Don't you think that in the same way that you haven't got on board with technology, that in a way the axis of environmental health hasn't shifted towards the actual current threats to?
I think that it would be foolish to answer that question considering the 23rd of June, and also with the likes of potentially Donald Trump coming in America as a president, bringing in TTIP perhaps, or whatever form of transatlantic trade agreement that takes, potentially destroying decades of work of environmental protection, food safety laws, health and safety laws, massive amounts of regulation that's been designed to protect the public health from potentially...
But it won't just evaporate, will it? On the day, God forbid, if we leave the EU, we won't just lose all of our historical legislation.
look at who our main trading partners are. Whether we are kind of obliged to, you know, have those rules and regulations because we're part of the EU, you know, it's irrelevant because we will still have to abide by those if we want to continue with our trading partners. I think it's irrelevant.
Yes.
And I think, you know, having worked all over the world, you know, in different regions, APAC, Americas, you know, Europe, food safety is food safety.
Yeah.
You know, health and safety is pretty much health and safety unless you get to China, and then it was kind of just non-existent. But, you know, in certain areas, you know, and there are other countries available and all the rest of it. But, you know, it's the same, you know, somebody mentioned back to basics.
Yeah.
It's not rocket science.
It's codex, isn't it, and HACCP. But doesn't
Well,
that mean...
No, do you know what? It's not even that. It's just common sense.
Well, is that a safe word to look at?
I think when we start using words like codex, we become an exclusive society again. Okay, because the general public, I would say, wouldn't know what codex was. And many people in the organisation that I currently work with don't understand what codex is, but they know what the Food Safety Act means, and they know what food safety generally means. You know, I'd really like to think that we start talking plain English about what is needed, and we can help you well informed.
I went to a presentation by, I think it was Anthony Worrell Thompson, one of those celebrity chefs. So if you're talking about the common sense, he would say, well, when I was a kid, you know, the blood used to drip from the roast into the fridge, into the trifle. And we used to eat the trifle, and we were never ill. And this, you know, the hygiene hypothesis. And to a lot of people, that's common sense, that's logic, that germs are good for you.
That's not common sense.
It's actually nonsense.
Okay, so maybe having a common language, so people understanding it, but when we start using, you know, language that is exclusive because we find it easier, or acronyms, we all do it. I mean, I worked for one of the worst organisations, the best organisations, ASDA, but the worst for acronyms. Everything was an acronym. And it just means that unintentionally we kind of excluding people from the conversation, and we're missing an opportunity to be able to help people understand, and so that we can share and that we can actually improve, you know, standards and you know, improve public health. It really irritates me when we have to kind of overcomplicate things.
The big question is, sorry, no, go on, Tim.
I mean, the two big issues for health in the future for me, one is the antibiotic resistance. Some of you have picked up on the fact there's already been very recently a Treasury report on the impacts of that. I mean, it may be that, I mean, my generation and my kids' generation, the lucky ones, we could easily see a return of some of the old scourges that we thought we'd beaten, you know, and why has that come about? Well, as the Treasury report itself has identified, it's because Big Pharma hasn't been investing much money in antibiotic research, and it's over 30 years since a new class of antibiotics was found, because they can make more money out of other things, and also because of widespread misuse of antibiotics in both for human health and among animal health as well. So that's one issue which I think, and it has a relevance to us because some of the things that our members were dealing with sort of 50, sort of 100 years ago may have only been banished temporarily rather than permanently. The other big issue, we often used to say that the way to improve someone's health is to, the best way of doing it is to get them a job, especially a meaningful job. Now, at the moment, we're sort of supposed to have full employment in this country, it's about 5% unemployment. But the reality is that less than half the population actually works. If you take out, if you reduce everything to full-time equivalents, it's about 40% of the population works, 60% of the population doesn't. That percentage is likely to further shrink, particularly with the new technologies. And that actually opens this whole issue around how we share work out. Are we going to end up with a very unequal society where there's a large group who are permanently out of work, or are we going to end up one where we share that around? Because the reality is, we talked about it already, that the new technologies are moving out into automating professional jobs. The lawyers, the financial advisors, the doctors, they're actually a whole range of things are now being sort of dealt with in a very different way. And that's going to continue. So what skills will you need to be employed in the future? And are you just going to be one of a lucky elite? Or are we all going to have a lot more leisure time? The answers to those questions will define what sort of society we have in the future and what our role in it is.
But then do you think that we as a profession should be shouting, or sort of rather singing toward the idea of perhaps a living wage, or maybe throwing our hat into it perhaps and saying that it might improve public health if everyone did have a living wage, everyone could spend much more time having a better quality of life rather than perhaps just surviving, working another day for the sake of...
One of the areas I'm interested in is the vulnerable groups. And there's a lot of stuff talked about how they should be treated in a different way, and there should be a label on food saying don't eat this if you're in a vulnerable group. And I'm actually really interested in the fact that I think we've probably got vulnerable groups, probably over half the population actually. If you add up all the people who are pregnant, got cancer, immunosuppressed, and over the age of 60, under the age of 5 or 7 or 10, depending on the organism. And at the moment, that linked in with obesity, there's a massive problem that is getting bigger, and that is the use of drugs to suppress acid reflux. In America, it's just gone out of proportion, and young children are being given these antacids and proton pump inhibitors flavoured as Coca-Cola or anything like that. There's actually a great big market now for these things to be flavoured so that kids will take them. We've got obese people taking these drugs. They're becoming more vulnerable to infection because their gastric juices are not working as they should be. And I think we've got to really address this is again the holistic side of things. Don't just put a label on saying if you're vulnerable, don't eat this. Actually, should the food be safe for everybody? There's some shockingly bad labels on food at the moment. I came across one on a Brie de Meaux Waitrose, and apart from the fact that it's so tiny that the vulnerable groups probably wouldn't be able to read it either, the elderly people. But I think we've got to think it's got to be safe for everybody. And there's this sort of worry that we're being nanny state if we say you can't have an unsafe food. But on the other hand, I don't think there's a real understanding about who is actually in this vulnerable group.
Touching on that, I mean, there's also concerns about, going back to my technical director for Asda's kind of days, is making sure that the products that are on shelf and available for consumers to buy will actually satisfy their nutritional needs. Because obviously, as we become an ageing population, the way that we assimilate and kind of digest foods and absorb the nutrients changes quite dramatically. And so, you could have eaten the same meal as a 30-year-old, but then eat it as a 50-year-old, and you will not derive the same benefit from it. And there's a lot of work that's being done in that. So you'd also have to think it's not just about the safe food, which is absolutely correct, but you will therefore have to tailor make some of the products or give some advice and guidance to what you can have. So, for instance, steak, have it with a slice of lemon if it's about vitamin C kind of enrichment to be able to get the iron, for example. I mean, I don't know, I'm not an expert, but I'm just giving you an example. But, things like that matter. I've got some good news for you on the antibiotic resistance, and I'm sure that Lisa will be far more familiar with it, that we probably don't have to worry about it as much as we've been told to worry about it, because actually now the money is being spent and diverted into technologies investigating viruses that will be targeted and created to go after that particular pathogen and so control diseases that way. So whereas we've relied on antibiotics for years and years, we will actually be moving into a completely different regime, and it will be, you'll be going for a viral pill to basically control that. So, and the reason that I only know that is just another chance conversation with a consultant microbiologist, and I don't know the name, but I can find it, and I didn't know whether you might actually already know it, but it's something else just for us to think about and share these nuggets of information. And do you know what? It might not be true. I hope it is, because I'm believing it now, and just because I can sleep at night.
I think on the other hand, Dawn, that what's really important is we go back to basics, and if we haven't got antibiotics, then some of the things that are so basic, like hand washing, and the media find that really, really boring. They go, oh God, you're not going to talk about hand washing again, are you? And yes, I am, because actually there's still 50% of people in offices don't wash their hands. It's only when you actually put a monitoring device up and actually check who goes into the washroom and who actually uses the soap, and you can get a percentage compliance. It's around 50% before people are actually told to do something about it. Oh, by the way, you're being monitored. Suddenly it goes up to 80%. And floor upstairs, they've got 90%. So suddenly it all goes up and people are actually washing their hands.
It's a speed camera for washing hands.
Yes, it's so easy, so straightforward, and yet people don't do it. And yet, if we really do go back to basics, that's one of the best ways of preventing a disease. And yet people think, oh, well, we can take a pill, it'll fix it.
If you want to go a few more years ahead, 30 years, well, if you actually look at the moment, challenges to public health at the moment, aren't they really about lifestyle choices? It's not so much about food safety, actually. Isn't it about obesity? It's about smoking.
Well, that's kind of what I was saying,
alcohol abuse, suicide,
Yeah.
are they lifestyle choices? What's the cause of those? Are we getting to the cause of those? If you really want to get to what are the challenges for public health, isn't it the cause of the causes?
Yeah.
So what is that? Is that are people unhappy in their lives? Their life doesn't match up to what we're meant to be doing and how happy we're meant to be and how much we're meant to buy and how much we're meant to consume. Isn't there lots of disappointment in life that causes some of these things?
I agree. I think Tim touched on that, and Tim would know because he works for the Samaritans and for the Citizens Advice Bureau.
Well, my point was going to be, if that's what we're looking at the moment, rather than trying to catch up with some of those, what's going to be coming around the corner? Are we going to catch up with obesity before a new genetic engineering creates a pill that means that we can eat as much as we like, but we don't actually get fat? I think it's around the corner, isn't it? Apparently it is. It's only probably a few years away. Genetic engineering is probably one of the things that helps us get through a lot of the disease and the like. But at the same time, some of these new challenges, things that are going to help us in the future, aren't they potentially our biggest risk to public health? What's the virtual world going to do to our well-being if it's all virtual? What stress is that going to be put on people to be connected to the whole world and the whole world's knowledge and all your mates and the whole world all at the same time? How much stress is that going to put on us? Can people cope with that? Is that going to be something that increases the rate of suicide, of depression, of alcoholism, of drug abuse? What about IT viruses then? So once we're connected in, what about, forget the biological viruses, what about IT viruses? What about IT vandalism and antisocial behaviour? White noise regulation. We get so much white noise because we're plugged into everybody. That becomes...
Well, they have a
we need to
USB
regulate
in the
that.
back of your
White
head.
noise is a problem.
I think this is probably a debate we'll be having in 30 years' time, Alan.
Is it? Or is it 10
maybe
years' time?
10 years' time. No, you're right. The pace of change is absolutely incredible, isn't it?
So do we need a virtual regulator?
I think that there's just going off to an extent actually with what you were saying about it's the people themselves. I think that as a profession we're actually missing a massive opportunity based on taking an attitudinal segmentation approach to the market of the people that we speak to. I mean, you want to have a look at the attitudes, look at the behaviours, look at their aspirations, look at their drivers. And when you're talking about, are you treating obesity, are you treating the cause of obesity, are you treating things behind it? If we as a profession can actually better understand the people that we're ultimately serving, that we're actually ultimately going to be working with and working for, then surely that's going to be able to set the groundwork for more effective interventions in the future. And more than that, though, you then take away it doesn't matter if you're in Durham, it doesn't matter if you're in Wakefield, it doesn't matter if you're in Cornwall, you understand the people. And so long as if you can get sort of, perhaps these days you might be able to work out an algorithm with the supercomputers or whatever with it, but if you can work out something that you can adapt, perhaps a framework or something even actually quite simple to fit these drives in, this segmentation in, I think that any future intervention from now and into the 30 years' time, be it plugged in or not, will become more effective. So maybe we need to think about working smarter by taking perhaps...
To be honest, if we don't accept GM foods, we won't have a right lot to worry about anyway.
That's true. And we're going to end it. Could I just ask you to thank in the usual way our wonderful panel for... and thank you for attending. Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for coming.